A worker digging through a quiet Michigan peat bog uncovered what looked like an ordinary piece of rusted iron. It was small enough to fit in one hand and easy to overlook, yet the soil surrounding it suggested a far more complicated story. If the artifact truly belonged to the layer where it was found, it appeared centuries older than historians expected for iron technology in that region. Was the discovery misplaced, misunderstood, or pointing towards something history had not fully explained? Before we examine the evidence, tell us where you're watching from, and let's return to the moment this remarkable investigation first began. At first glance, the discovery seemed unremarkable. Archaeologists recover thousands of metal objects every year, ranging from nails and knives to farming tools and broken hardware. Most help answer small historical questions before quietly joining museum collections or research archives. This object appeared destined for the same routine path until researchers examined where it had been found. Location matters as much as the artifact itself. An object lying on the surface tells only part of its story because wind, water, farming, and human activity can move it over time. Archaeologists place far greater importance on artifacts discovered within undisturbed layers of soil. Those surrounding sediments preserve a timeline, allowing researchers to estimate when different materials entered the ground and how they relate to one another. Michigan's peat bogs are especially valuable for this kind of work. Unlike ordinary soil, peat accumulates slowly as generations of plants decay in waterlogged conditions. Because oxygen remains scarce beneath the surface, organic materials often survive far longer than they would elsewhere. Wooden objects, leather, textiles, seeds, and even pollen can remain preserved for centuries, giving researchers an unusually detailed record of the past. That natural preservation makes peat bogs important historical archives rather than simple wetlands. Every layer represents another chapter in the landscape's history. Disturbing those layers without careful documentation risks destroying information that cannot be recovered later. Before the iron tool appeared, historians already possessed a well-established understanding of Michigan's past. Indigenous communities had lived throughout the Great Lakes region for thousands of years, developing sophisticated trade networks, skilled craftsmanship, and thriving cultures long before sustained European settlement. Archaeological evidence documenting those societies continues growing every year through careful excavation and scientific research. Iron, however, introduces a different question. Unlike stone, bone, wood, or copper, manufactured iron requires complex smelting technology capable of producing high temperatures under controlled conditions. Historians understand when widespread iron production reached different parts of the world, and they also understand how iron objects gradually spread through trade, exploration, and settlement. Because of that broader timeline, an iron artifact discovered in an unexpected archaeological context naturally attracts close attention. That does not mean accepted history suddenly becomes incorrect. Archaeologists never rewrite historical timelines because of a single surprising object. Instead, they begin asking difficult questions. Could the artifact have entered the ground much later? Was the surrounding soil disturbed? Did natural processes move it from another location? Could earlier visitors have introduced it through trade or travel? Every possibility must be tested before larger conclusions become credible. The discovery became important not because researchers immediately believed they had overturned centuries of historical understanding. It became important because the evidence deserved careful investigation before anyone reached a conclusion. Good archaeology advances through verification rather than excitement. The rusted tool had raised an intriguing question. Answering it required documenting every detail with extraordinary care before laboratory analysis could even begin. Recovering the object without destroying its archaeological context became the next critical step. Once that information disappeared, no scientific method could ever bring it back. A surprising discovery means very little if nobody can prove exactly where it came from. Archaeologists understand that an artifact removed carelessly loses much of its scientific value. Before anyone attempted to answer difficult historical questions, the excavation itself had to be documented with complete accuracy. If you're enjoying this investigation into forgotten history, consider subscribing. Every discovery in this series follows the evidence first, because the smallest detail often changes the biggest story. Work began by marking the location instead of immediately lifting the object from the ground. Survey equipment recorded its exact position, while photographs captured the surrounding soil before anything changed. Every angle mattered because the original setting could never be recreated once excavation moved forward. The digging continued slowly. Rather than using heavy equipment, archaeologists relied on hand tools designed for delicate work. Small trowels, soft brushes, wooden picks, and measuring scales allowed the surrounding soil to be removed a little at a time. The goal was not speed. The goal was preserving information. Each layer received careful attention. Soil color, texture, moisture, and composition were recorded because even subtle differences helped identify natural deposits or signs of earlier disturbance. A sudden change in sediment could reveal flooding, erosion, animal activity, or previous human excavation. Nothing was assumed. Samples from nearby peat were collected separately for laboratory analysis. Plant remains, tiny fragments of wood, pollen, and other organic material offered valuable clues about the age and environmental conditions of the surrounding layer. Sometimes those materials reveal more about a site's history than the artifact itself. The iron tool remained in place until researchers believed every important observation had been recorded. Only then was it lifted carefully, packaged to prevent additional corrosion, and labeled with detailed notes connecting it permanently to its excavation record. Without that documentation, future researchers would have little reason to trust any conclusions drawn from the find. Back at the laboratory, attention shifted toward conservation before analysis. Iron recovered from wet environments often begins deteriorating rapidly once exposed to air. Conservators stabilized the artifact by controlling temperature and humidity, slowing the chemical reactions that could damage its surface before detailed examination became possible. Meanwhile, specialists reviewed the excavation records independently. Measurements, photographs, field notes, and sample locations were compared to ensure nothing had been overlooked. Archaeology depends upon repeatable evidence, so every observation had to withstand careful scrutiny from other experts as well. The excavation produced something more valuable than a single object. It created a complete record of where that object rested, what surrounded it, and how it related to the landscape around it. Those details would ultimately determine whether the discovery represented an ordinary historical find or something deserving much closer attention. By the time the fieldwork concluded, researchers had preserved both the artifact and its archaeological context. The investigation now entered its most demanding stage. Recovering the tool answered where it had been found. Determining when it entered the peat and how it was made would require evidence that only the laboratory could provide. Once the artifact reached the laboratory, the investigation changed completely. The excavation had answered where the object was found. The next challenge was understanding what it actually was. A rusted piece of iron can hide important details beneath layers of corrosion, and appearances alone rarely provide reliable answers. Conservators began by cleaning only the outer surface that obscured important features. Every stage was documented because aggressive cleaning can remove evidence just as easily as dirt. Small marks left by shaping, sharpening, or repeated use often survive beneath corrosion, offering clues about how an object was manufactured and the purpose it once served. Specialists examined the artifact under magnification before taking any samples. They searched for hammer marks, forging patterns, worn cutting edges, fractures, and traces of repair. Those details helped determine whether the object had been shaped by a blacksmith, broken during use, or modified long after it was originally made. The metal itself also became part of the investigation. Metallurgists studied its internal structure to understand how the iron had been produced. Different manufacturing techniques leave distinctive microscopic patterns inside the metal. Slag inclusions, grain structure, and carbon content can reveal whether the object came from bloomery iron, later industrial production, or another method entirely. Those characteristics often provide stronger evidence than appearance alone. Researchers also examined the corrosion products that formed while the tool rested inside the peat bog. Waterlogged environments create different chemical changes than dry soil, and those reactions sometimes help explain how long an artifact remained underground. Although corrosion cannot provide an exact date by itself, it contributes another piece to the overall picture. Dating the iron directly proved far more difficult. Unlike wood or bone, iron cannot be dated using radiocarbon methods. Instead, Scientists focused on the surrounding organic material recovered during excavation. Fragments of preserved plant matter, peat, and other nearby deposits were analyzed to estimate when that layer of the bog had formed. Those results established the age of the surrounding environment rather than the metal itself. That distinction became extremely important. If the surrounding deposits truly remained undisturbed, the artifact might have entered the bog when that layer formed. If the ground had been disturbed sometime afterward, however, the object could have reached an older layer much later. Understanding the history of the soil became just as important as studying the tool itself. Not every expert interpreted the findings in the same way. Some researchers argued that the archaeological context deserved serious consideration because the excavation had been carefully documented. Others urged caution, pointing out that natural processes, later human activity, or subtle disturbances can occasionally alter the original position of buried objects without leaving obvious signs. Those different interpretations reflected the normal process of scientific research, rather than disagreement over the facts themselves. The laboratory had produced valuable evidence, but evidence alone does not automatically produce unanimous conclusions. The investigation had narrowed the possibilities considerably. Even so, one question continued challenging everyone involved. Laboratory testing explained how the object was made and revealed important clues about its history. Deciding why it appeared in such an unexpected place would prove even more difficult. Sometimes the biggest historical questions begin with the smallest discoveries. Whether this iron tool ultimately changes our understanding of the past or simply deepens it, the investigation reminds us that history is never truly finished. If you enjoy evidence-based historical mysteries, subscribe and join us for the next journey into the past.